The perfection of the Sterling named my family, the Sterlings, were the undisputed royalty of our small, affluent town. My father, Julian, was a retired judge with a reputation for ironclad integrity, and my mother, Lydia, was a philanthropist whose name graced the wings of hospitals and libraries. We lived in a sprawling Victorian estate that felt more like a museum than a home, filled with antique furniture and portraits of ancestors who looked down on us with cold, aristocratic approval. Growing up, I was taught that our name was our most valuable asset, a shield of perfection that protected us from the messy realities of the common world. I never questioned the stories they told me about our history, until a leaking pipe in the attic forced me to move a trunk that hadn't been touched in 40 years. The copper boxy attic was a labyrinth of dust and forgotten memories, smelling of cedar and old paper. While trying to clear a path of plumber, I shoved aside a heavy, moth-eaten rug, revealing a small, tarnished copper box tucked into a floorboard niche. It had no lock, just a simple latch that felt hot against my thumb. Inside, I didn't find family jewels or old letters. I found a stack of official-looking documents from 1985, a set of keys to a property in a city my parents claimed they had never visited, and a photograph of my father standing next to a man who looked exactly like him, except this man was wearing a prison jumpsuit. My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized the man in the photo wasn't just a stranger. He was a mirror image of the judge who preached morality every night at dinner. The first lie, I spent the next hours sitting in the dust, reading through the documents. They were legal transcripts for a trial that had been scrubbed from the public record. My father, the unimpeachable Julian Sterling, hadn't been an only child as he had always claimed. He had a twin brother named Silas. According to the transcripts, Silas had been convicted of a massive embezzlement scheme that had nearly bankrupted the very town my father now served. But as I dug deeper, I noticed something chilling. The signatures on embezzled checks didn't match Silas's handwriting. They matched my father's perfectly. The accidental discovery of this copper box was the first loose thread in a tapestry of deception that spanned my entire life. The silent investigation. I knew I couldn't confront my parents immediately. In the Sterling household, a direct question was often met with a wall of polite, icy silence or a redirection so skillful you forgot what you'd asked. I had to become a ghost in my own home. I began making errands to the city mentioned in the documents, visiting the mysterious property. It turned out to be a small, dilapidated townhouse in a neighborhood that would have made my mother faint. Using the keys in the box, I entered a home that felt like a time capsule. It was filled with my father's personal belongings, his favorite brand of cigars, his college law books, and a hidden safe that contained a ledger of payments made to a private sanitarium for the last 30 years. The sanitarium's secret to ledger led me to Oak Ridge Estates, a high-security private facility hidden behind miles of forest. I checked in under a false name, claiming to be a researcher. What I found broke my heart and fueled my fury. My dead Uncle Silas was alive, tucked away in a luxury room, heavily medicated and forgotten by the world. He had been paid to take the fall for my father's crimes decades ago, and in exchange, my parents had funded his care to keep him silent and invisible. The elaborate deception wasn't just about protecting a name. It was about a man who had traded his brother's life for a judge's robe. The philanthropist's ledger, I returned home and began looking into my mother's philanthropy. If my father's career was built on a crime, where was the money coming from to support our lavish lifestyle? I broke into my mother's private study late one night, my hands trembling as I bypassed a simple lock on her desk. I found a second set of books for her foundation. The donations weren't going to hospitals. The foundation was a massive laundering front for local developers who needed favorable rulings from my father. My mother wasn't a saint. She was the CFO of a family-run extortion ring. The dinner party facade that Friday, my parents hosted a lavish dinner party for the governor. I sat at the table, watching my mother laugh delicately while my father discussed the importance of the rule of law. I looked at them and felt a physical wave of nausea. Every piece of silver on the table, every bottle of vintage wine, was paid for with the blood of my uncle's reputation and the bribes of corrupt businessmen. I realized then that my parents didn't love me. They loved the idea of me as the next generation of their perfect, hollowed dynasty. The shadow in the hallway, I began to feel like I was being watched. My father's security detail, men I had grown up thinking were family friends, started appearing in places they shouldn't be. One evening, I found my father standing in the doorway of my bedroom, his face shrouded in shadow. "You've been spending a lot of time in the attic, Elias," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "The dust up there can be very confusing. It's best to leave the past where it belongs." It was a warning, clear and cold. They knew I had found the box. The disappearing evidence, I rushed to the attic the next morning, but the floorboard niche was empty. The copper box was gone. When I checked my mother's desk, the second ledger had vanished. They were cleaning house, erasing the evidence before I could use it. But they had forgotten one thing. I had photographed every single page of my phone and uploaded it to a secure, encrypted cloud server they didn't know existed. I wasn't just a Sterling. I was a digital native, and they were still playing by the rules of the 1980s. The confrontation at the sanitarium, I drove back to Oak Ridge, determined to get Silas out. But when I arrived, the staff told me he had been transferred just hours ago. No records, no destination. My father had moved his brother to a place where I would never find him. I stood in the empty room, looking at a small wooden carving of a bird Silas had left behind. It was then I realized that my parents weren't just protecting a secret. They were willing to dispose of anyone who threatened it, even their own family. The lawyer's gamble. I reached out to an old law school friend, Marcus, who specialized in high-level whistleblowing. We met in a crowded park, speaking in whispers. "Elias, this isn't just a scandal," Marcus warned, looking to the photos on my phone. "This is a criminal enterprise. If you move against them, they will try to destroy you. They have the police, the courts, and the press in their pocket." I told him I didn't care. The accidental discovery had become a moral obligation. The trap is set. We decided to wait for the family's annual Founders Day Gala. It was the biggest event of the year, attended by every power player in the state. My father was slated to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award. We planned to hijack the digital presentation, replacing his highlight reel with the evidence of the embezzlement and the laundering. I had to play the part of the loyal son for one more week, attending rehearsals and smiling for the cameras while I prepared to burn my heritage to the ground. The midnight meeting 2 nights before the gala, my mother came to my room. She didn't threaten me. She tried to buy me. She sat on the edge of my bed and spoke about the burden of the Sterling name. "We did what we had to do to ensure your future, Elias," she whispered. "Do you think we enjoyed the sacrifices? Your uncle was a weak man. He would have ruined us all. We chose you." She offered me a position on the board of the foundation and a massive trust fund. I realized then that her love was just another transaction. The final rehearsal of the gala venue was a transformed ballroom, glittering with crystal and gold. I worked with a tech crew, pretending to double-check the visuals for the award ceremony. Under the cover of the loud music, I installed a small bypass device into main projector. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought the technicians would hear it. This was the point of no return. Once the gala started, the elaborate deception would either be exposed or I would be erased. The gala begins the evening was a blur of tuxedos and forced laughter. My father looked more presidential than ever, his silver hair gleaming under the spotlights. My mother was a vision in emerald, playing the perfect hostess. I stood by the tech booth, my hand hovering over the remote trigger in my pocket. The governor took the stage, beginning a long, glowing introduction about the unwavering moral compass of Judge Julian Sterling. The highlight reel, the lights dimmed, and the screen filled with images of my father's career. Photos of him at the bench, shaking hands with presidents and smiling at charity events. Then I pressed a button. The screen flickered. The music skipped. Instead of a photo of a new hospital wing, a high-resolution image of the 1985 embezzled checks appeared, followed by the video I had taken of Silas in the sanitarium. The silence of the ballroom, the gasps were audible, a collective intake of breath that felt like a physical shockwave. My father froze on stage, the smile dying on his face. The screen then cycled to my mother's laundering ledgers, showing clear links between the charity and the corrupt developers. I walked onto the stage, holding the wooden bird Silas had carved. The elaborate deception was being unraveled in front of the very people who had helped build it. The judge's final ruling My father didn't scream or beg. He looked at me with a cold, terrifying clarity. "You've destroyed everything, Elias," he said, his voice amplified by the microphone. "You think you're a hero? You're just a boy who destroyed a house he wasn't strong enough to live in." He walked off the stage as the police, the real federal agents Marcus had alerted, entered the room. The arrest the gala turned into a crime scene. My mother was escorted out in her emerald gown, her head held high even as the handcuffs clicked. My father followed, refusing to look at the crowd. The royalty of the town had fallen in a single evening. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of my family's legacy, feeling a strange, hollow victory. The search for Silas with my father in custody. The location of Silas was finally revealed. He had been moved to a cheap motel on the outskirts of the state. I found him sitting by the window, looking at the birds. He didn't recognize me at first, but when I showed him the copper box, he wept. I used my remaining personal funds to move him into a real home, a place with windows and no locks. The trial of the Sterlings, the legal battle, lasted 2 years. It was a national scandal that exposed the deep-seated corruption in our state's judicial system. My father was sentenced to 20 years. My mother received 12. The Victorian estate was seized by the government to pay back the extorted developers and the town. I was the star witness, the son who had dismantled his own throne. The aftermath, I was left with nothing but my name, which was now a synonym for scandal. I moved to a different city and changed it. I became Elias Miller, a quiet librarian who lived in a small apartment. I realized that the perfection I had grown up with was a prison, and the accidental discovery had been my key to the outside world. A visit to the prison, I visited my father once. He looked smaller in his jumpsuit, the aristocratic air replaced by a bitter, hollow resignation. He still refused to apologize. "You were a Sterling, Elias," he said. "You should have known better." I realized then that he would never understand that being a Sterling was the very thing I had to kill to become a human being. The legacy of Silas lived for 5 more years. In that time, we became a real family. He told me stories of his childhood with Julian, before the greed took over. He taught me how to carve wood. When he passed away, he left me a small wooden box he had made himself. Inside was a note: "Thank you for finding me." The final unraveling. I stand now on a quiet beach, looking at the ocean. The Sterlings are gone, their elaborate deception, a footnote in a history book. My accidental discovery didn't just unravel a lie. It saved my soul. I am no longer Prince of Hollow Kingdom. I am just a man, living a life that is honest, messy, and finally, truly mine.